Yeah, this kind of aligns with what I think about how everybody just kind of assumes there's some kind of God, because it's almost unfathomable to us statistically speaking, if you grab a human out of this 8 billion pipe and bring them up to a spaceship, chances are they're going to be praying to something. They're going to think something is. And even a lot of atheists probably would start if they were pulled up into an alien ship.
Welcome to the Bad Fruit Podcast. I am your host, Jonathan, and today is a very special and unique episode. Typically, our episodes here at Bad Fruit consist of me interviewing a guest, usually a pastor or an author, or some kind of expert on a specific topic. Or my co-host, Judah, who's also my brother, will join me and we'll expose bad fruit in the modern American evangelical church. Those are our basic, typical episodes. And I've also been doing the solo episodes where I walk through the different denominations. I've really enjoyed doing that. I've learned a lot, and I know that several of you have said that you appreciate those episodes also. Today is a little different. I am joined by two very different people, Brian and Richard. Brian, who goes by Puritan Panda on Facebook. He is a Christian who makes memes and does apologetic work through that Facebook page, Puritan Panda. And he is just an all-around cool dude and a great Christian thinker and lay theologian. Richard, who is probably best known or more broadly known as the Fallen Ape-Theist. He is an all-around cool dude also, and as you probably guessed, he's an atheist. Now, he has a very impressive resume. He sent it to me. So he currently serves as a senior intelligence analyst and a liaison with the United States federal government. For the past 31 years, he's worked in many realms of the intelligence community with the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and the Department of Homeland Security. From 1995 to 2005, he served in the United States Marine Corps, including tours in Haiti and Iraq. He has 2 postgraduate degrees with the University of Oklahoma, one in communications and another in international relations. And he has also completed a counterterrorism training program at the Naval Postgraduate School. Richard has a special focus in the radicalization process some people go through when they become committed to conducting violence in the interest of furthering ideological goals. He also studies the intricacies of the persuasion campaigns. These are the methodologies from organizations and social media algorithms that can prompt people to become fervent supporters of goals chosen by the campaign. So I am very honored to have Richard on, as well as Brian on, to have this conversation. Now, these two gentlemen joined me last month for a very awesome conversation, and it was great. However, due to some very unfortunate technical difficulties, most of the episode was lost. Unfortunately, I couldn't release it. However, these are extremely gracious people, and they've been very kind to me, and they've also been very generous with their time because they agreed to re-record the episode. So what you're about to hear is that re-recording. I've never had 2 guests on at the same time, and I've never hosted a debate before. So what this episode ended up being is actually not an interview at all, and it is not a debate. Instead, I actually, believe it or not, I mostly shut up. And I just let my Christian brother Brian talk with my atheist friend Richard, and they just have an honest conversation and share their views. Now, I do chime in a couple times, and I do ask a few questions, but overall, I just let Brian and Richard have the floor. I hope you will enjoy the conversation, and I hope that it will challenge you a little bit. I think that Brian does a great job articulating his ideas of love and truth. And I really liked his answer to my final question. But I'm not going to spoil it for you. You just got to listen to it. And one of the things that I love about Richard's form of atheism is that he's not trying to convince Christians to stop being Christian. In fact, I think he actually likes Christian values a lot, especially those displayed by Charles Ingalls. All right. I hope that you'll enjoy the episode. Today, I am joined by the Fallen Ape-Theist, Richard. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining me today on the Bad Fruit Podcast. How are you
Glad to
doing
be
today?
here.
Yeah.
I'm doing really well and glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are also joined by the Puritan Panda. How are you doing today, Brian?
Good. Still waking up, but I think my coffee is starting to work. So,
Well, you set the time, so.
yep, I did. I did.
Were you guys having a good summer? I know that it's hot where I am, so I don't know. Is it hot where you guys are?
Yeah, it is.
It's I either work in Arizona or Georgia, depending. So no matter what, my Georgias are sweltering.
Yeah, so you got the just sweltering heat of the South either way. Just different, probably more humid in Georgia though, I would assume. But
Yeah. Georgia's more humid, and then of course Arizona's the desert, so it's still bad.
yeah. We are going to try this again. We recorded a episode together, and due to some technical issues, we were unable to get the episode out, and it was a really great conversation. And I'm hoping that we can have a good conversation today. I'm going to start with you, Puritan Panda, because you kind of started the whole conversation. You made some posts on your page, and then Richard responded, and then our good friend Young Earth Creationist Octopus was like, "Why don't you guys just go on the Bad Fruit Podcast and have a conversation?" And so, thank you, Octopus, for that suggestion, and you both were really gracious to do that. Maybe you can kind of frame the conversation and how it started.
The focus or the thing that I had posted about was how we should think about knowledge and whether or not it's something that should be authoritative or should be in subordination to something else. And I used the example in the last attempt at this of a man who is standing out in a field. And let's imagine that in this field, he has no knowledge of anything. But as he stands there, he notices another person out in the distance. And because of how I understand knowledge as something that ought to be in subordination to Christ rather than something that is authoritative in itself, I was making the case that this man, despite having no knowledge at this moment, should still have some capacity to recognize how he ought to treat this other person that he is observing at a distance. And so the question then for me is, what should knowledge be in subordination to? And my whole framework for this, and something I mentioned in this long post that I addressed to Richard, was that I'm framing this as a relationship between truth and love, and how these two things have to actually be functioning together in order for either one of them to make sense. And that at the heart of both of these things is where we find our authority. And so truth then, for this man who doesn't know anything yet, should only act as a means to enhance his ability to treat this other person as he ought to treat them. And the ought, which is derived from authority, because it's recognized, I argue that there's a coherence in Christianity that seems to me to point to its truth more than not, because Christ seems to me to be the full embodiment of where that ought logically goes. Given the fact that we can read and we can compare different religious figures throughout history, and we can look at them within their own sort of religious and historical contexts, and the conclusions that we draw from them. To me, it seems that Christianity seems to bring truth and love together better than anything else, and I would even go so far as to say that the miracles, especially of the resurrection, seems to be where we actually find vindication to make appeals to truth and to love. And I think that everyone does make those appeals in order to justify behaviors in life. So I'm looking at this from sort of a behavioral standpoint as I observe people, and I'm looking at this from how we are designed as purposed creatures, and how our behavior speaks to that as we make appeals to these two things. So I hope that makes sense. I tried to word it a little differently than the last time to see if I could improve upon it, but that's how I'm thinking about these things,
So that's sort of your thesis statement.
basically.
Yeah. Okay. And Richard, you responded, um,
And
or
then
how would you respond? Yeah. Go
uh,
ahead.
I responded, and then all heck broke loose. Basically, I was just saying, okay, great, but can another religion just say that too? They could say, okay, knowledge must be submissive to something, and our religion perfectly aligns with that once you look at it metaphysically and physically and logically and reasonably, and with math and with scripture and with revelation and all that. And then, of course, they're going to have a different way to get there, but they're going to get there because they're committed to their religion. And I'm going to say, why should I listen to Brian over this other guy who's got another great swath of lines that goes from his religion to knowledge must be submitted. And that was similar to what Brian's response to that was similar to his opening statement there. And I should say my worldview is that our species, we're all trying to solve problems, and we solve problems culturally. And if you could rewind time, and let's say somehow aliens came to the three of us and said, we have that possibility. We can rewind time back to 2,000 years ago, and we can switch things around and then just watch the world go forward. And then we could do it again, and then we could do it again. We could do it like a million times, and you won't age, and we could do it really quickly, and no time will pass on Earth. But just as a test case, let's do that. And we get up in their spaceship, and we go back, and we tweak history so that Jesus takes a left instead of a right, and Christianity doesn't emerge. My argument is that something will emerge. It might not take us to where we are now. We could be in the best possible world, but and if you fast forward to 2026, of those other timelines, all those other timelines, some might be horrible, some might be better, some might be about the same. English wouldn't even exist in a lot of those things because English didn't exist 2,000 years ago. So there would just be a whole bunch of differences, but there would be some kind of cultural, a lot of cultural norms that would be about what's the intellectual thing to do and what's the moral thing to do, because every culture is based on intellect and morality. Those are the two big platforms. And then whatever the culture says is what you value out of those platforms, and that's the big sacred thing. All those cultures would have something that was sacred, even if it wasn't divinely sacred. They would say, if it was an atheist norm, they would say, don't say sacred because there's no deity. Then they would say, okay, well, we'll say inviolable or unassailable. But these are things that you can't touch. These things are the pinnacle of what's true. Every culture would do that. And Brian might be right that Christianity, as it is now in the West, might be the best we can do. It could be that it's got to be some kind of a deity, and it's got to preach that we should struggle for truth and love. So I don't argue that Christianity needs to go away or that there could be a better religion, or even that there could be, I differ with a lot of my atheist friends who say, let's just drop religion. Let's just get back to facts. I don't necessarily agree with that because we're not really a factual species. We're very much what's our cultural norms, and we're going to cling to that. And then usually we reason backwards from there. So I don't know that we could train our species to not be that way. So I don't argue that Christianity can't be true or that there's a better way to do it than Christianity. But I would say that the way we are now has a lot to do with our species, and we kind of inherited, like the three of us inherited this particular religion when we were born into it, and then we all three decided how we were going to deal with it. But had we been born in one of these other cultures, we would have done the same thing with one of those other cultures, and all those little infinite timelines that the aliens helped us create. That's really my take. I don't mean to say never mind Christianity or get rid of Christianity. Just that I think it's just a result of our history, and and the way our species is.
So is that the premise of your sci-fi novel you're writing? The aliens come and
Yes,
rewind time.
yes,
Uh,
I'm working on that. Thank you.
yeah,
Yes.
Steven Spielberg would probably direct it. He's into all that. So no, that's an interesting thought experiment to think about. Is it's just the timeline that we have, so to speak. I think that the true God, if God is the ultimate thing, then he will be regardless of the timeline. Like he would be outside of time. So the true God, I feel like, would exist in any of those timelines. Brian, I'll let you answer.
Yeah, I mean, I do think about this kind of in relation to conversations I've had with Molinists. With the multiple worlds sort of
do
hypothesis.
do you want to define that just real quickly, because some people
Yeah,
don't know what
Molinism.
Molinism means?
Yeah, well, let me take it slow because okay. So far as I understand, Molinism basically it's trying to resolve the tension between how God is sovereign over everything and how we as people still have to be held responsible for the choices that we make. And so God looks through all of these possible universes and decides on the one in which the greatest number of people are saved. And one of my objections to Molinism is that I would say that the world that we live in is the world that we live in because it is the only one that we could have found ourselves in, because life predominantly speaks to who God is and not who we are. I also think that Molinism frames the question of the human will and human nature differently than I would, because I don't think that we are capable of simply choosing for ourselves to believe in God. I mean, I'm a Calvinist, obviously, so I would
Sure.
say that that's something that actually has to be God has to indwell us before we can actually make a decision towards Him. So yeah, I would probably say, even to Richard's position, that I could imagine, different kinds of realities in which we find ourselves believing different things and in different cultures. But I would still say that even if that could be true, if we were fundamentally still the kinds of people that we are, I would still say that in a way that still speaks to the truth of Christianity, because of what we are naturally drawn to and how we are naturally inclined to build culture and to build civilization. I would say that, perhaps in the past Jesus never came and never died and never rose, but I would say that within the human heart we might still expect there to be a desire that at some point that may actually happen, that Christ might actually come and do the things that he did, because I think that that's simply built into just who we are. So the faith aspect would just, be brought to the other side.
I think it's almost inevitable that our species is going to believe in some type of deity, because I think we project agency onto things, and so here I am, not supposed to believe in deities, but if I drop my phone, I'll be like, "Why did you do that? I was holding you," and then I'll be like, "Don't tell me about gravity. I was holding you. Don't tell me that you came out of my hand. You decided to get down there on the ground. Get back up here." I say that I'm too good for that, and yet I'll yell at my phone for leaving my hand. So I think that's human nature, to project agency. But also, I think we talked about this in our first attempt at our podcast. I also think in order for us to be cultural creatures, we have to believe that morality is objective. And so when we come to moral norms, the moral things that really get us riled up, we're like, this should be plain and clear to every single person. This shouldn't be something that I analyze my way to. This should be just something that hits us. And just when we start thinking about it, we're like, I don't even have to think about it. It's just so immediate and apparent. I think everybody does that. And even when I listen to atheists debate objective morality, as they're speaking, they're revealing the things that they think ought to be clear to everyone else, and that they can't believe how inept or contaminated people are to not see these perfectly clear moral absolute truths. Even though they're saying there's no such thing, they're still revealing that they do think that. So I think it's human nature to do both of those things, and from that you're inevitably going to get there's something out there, and there could be something out there. There could be a great and mighty deity out there, and he made all this, and he gave us this intrinsic feeling that morality is objective. And obviously we all know that even though most people have to be wrong about what they think is objective morality, that doesn't mean that there's no such thing. But it is the case that most people have to be wrong about what they think is objective morality. So that should just at least make us worried. I don't know if you guys know Josh Rasmussen. Have you guys ever heard of him?
No.
For anybody listening, he's got a great book, How Reason Can Lead to God. So go check that book out. It's a really, really short read, or you can just watch a video on it from Josh Rasmussen. But he asked me once, he said, what if those aliens, that I was just talking about, what if those aliens turn to you and say, we actually figured out that theism is true. We actually were able to go and interact with that situation. We're not going to tell you. We're not going to tell you what it's like, but we can guarantee you that theism is true. And before we go, when we show you, we want you to tell us what form of theism would make sense. Now that you know theism is true, what form of theism would make sense? So he's asking me, well, how would you respond to that? And I said, okay, if they confirm, and I believe them, that some form of theism is true, it would either be something like a pantheon of gods where they all have different wishes and needs, and just, one goes this way and one goes that way, and one tells this guy and one tells this lady. That would explain reality. Or there's a God that's messing with us, and he's created the world, and he's like, hey, I'm going to go tell this guy this stuff, then I'm going to wait a few hundred years, and then I'm going to go tell this guy this stuff, and I'm going to be deadly serious, and I'm going to tell him he's got to work at it, and then I'm just going to cackle to myself and watch them as they all kind of run with what they've been, genuinely, it's been revealed to them. So you can't blame them for running with it, but I'm doing this on purpose. So those are my two options. Those are the only possible two options that I would agree to if it turns out that there is a God out there. It's got to be a bunch with different goals, or it's got to be one that's just actively and purposely messing with us.
So you don't think that there's a possibility of a perfect, holy, loving God?
If there is, he's not paying attention to us. And also I tell people he's not going to step forward. If we do something, the idea that Jesus is going to one day come and restore everything and make everything right, I tell people act as if that's never going to happen. If you've got a big battle coming, or if things are stacking up where you're trying to survive, the more time you spend on your knees pleading to the ground is more time wasted, because he is not coming. So maybe he's perfect and loving, but just not towards us. Maybe he's perfect and loving to the universe or something, but we don't factor into that.
I kind of want to respond to a couple of things. I've been thinking about this alien analogy that you've given. Um, One of the things that I think about, even within how I've been developing my own framework, is answering something of an existential question, which is, if we were to place all of these religions, let's say that we aren't dealing with history like with the aliens, but we are dealing with just looking at all of the different religious options that we have out there, which one has the ability to become existentially satisfying, or produce the greatest world for ourselves? I think that because I'm framing this as between truth and love, we can fathom a best possible world as well, and think about what would that require, like what would that be derived from. And I think that if we are to find value in truth, it is because it coheres with the best possible kind of reality that we can find ourselves in. And to the other point about believing in the future, about whether or not Christ is going to come back or not, I actually think that because there is that kind of hope, we don't actually have to be cynics in reality. Like, we can actually live in a way that says, because I believe that this better world is coming, I should act in accordance with what it would be like to actually be a citizen in that world. So I see Christianity as something that is I think more deeply participatory than simply being down on my knees. Of course, that is a part of it. But actually, how can I act in a way that speaks to a better world that I know is coming? I think as I'm listening to you, something I'm hearing is because we believe in this better world coming, we can sort of just hope in that and not really think about our role or our duties in the current state of things.
Yeah, I'll concede that point. So for the people keeping score, I'll give him that one, because I agree that if you think a better world is coming and you're like, I'm going to start acting like that now, as if we're there. That reminds me of Little House on the Prairie, both versions. There's the old version that I grew up with, and the new version that just came out this past weekend, where they're doing that. They're like, okay, we're in this wilderness, we're in this untamed world, but if we don't start walking up to each other and saying, hey, how are you, and being respectful, if we don't start doing that ourselves, then we're never going to get to this better place where we can all kind of live side by side and not be scalping each other. I think that part's true. When I was saying hoping for a better future, I meant like you've got work to do, you've got things you've got to do, and you're like, no, I'm just going to wait and hope that that's coming right now. Like, I'm just going to keep praying for him to come right now and get me out of this. I was saying I don't think he's ever going to come get you out of it. I think you're going to be in it until you die. But if you make the choice now to say, okay, in order to avoid that kind of a nightmare, I'm going to start treating people respectfully and visualize this better type of world, and I'm going to behave in accordance to it. Heck, I do that. I do that myself. So yeah, I agree to that.
The actual message of the Bible is that we are hoping for this. We do believe Christ will return. We do believe in the resurrection of the body. But we also are told to get to work, take care of widows and orphans, and so we're not supposed to just be sitting around doing nothing. But unfortunately, you are right. There's a lot of Christians, especially over the last couple hundred years, who have kind of just taken that mindset, like, "Hey, God's coming back any minute," and so I'm just kind of checked out, and I think that is unfortunate, absolutely. So it's a good point to make that if you're gonna live it out, then live it out.
I was going to say too. This reminds me of a conversation I was having with a friend even just a couple of days ago, and this person's not a Christian, but we were talking about things similar to this, and he was saying, interestingly enough, that he believes that perhaps if he does, he will die one day, but perhaps if he does come into judgment, he thinks that given how he has lived, he actually believes that he would do pretty well, standing before God on that day, and that given the kind of life that he lived and the kind of person that he was, he believes that he should, be granted eternal life. And the question that I asked him was, I mean, have you made your life into something that is already relational with God now, or has your life mainly been about your own interests? And I said, why would you want to enter into a life with someone that you had no interest in entering into a life with while you were alive? It seems to me that if you have this hope of going somewhere where someone is someday, that your life should reflect that desire right now. And part of that desire should be in the way that we behave. If the person that we long to be with is a certain way, then how we behave should reflect that kind of person. Because I think that much of Christianity is actually a kind of a mental game. And I think that we have to, as Christians, set forth a vision, not of how the world is, but how the world could be. And I think that as a Calvinist, I sort of frame it this way, that we get a sense of this vision as a taste of a world to come. It's God really does give us new life, the new birth. And that new birth is more than simply that we have been saved from something, as sort of treating salvation as a true only in terms of negative effects being dismissed. But we have to think about this as well in the positive effects. What does this actually bring us into? And I think one of the things that it brings us into is a vision of a better world, and a taste of that. And not only the taste of it, but I think that as we are indwelt by his spirit, we actually gain affections for what this better world will be as well. And so it becomes deeply participatory. We have a vision for something that is coming, and more as we desire to have a relationship with God, we also have a desire to participate in this life with God in a way that would uh, produce the very world that we desire to live in. So the Bible speaks of an already and not yet. So in a way, we have already become citizens of heaven. In a way, we have already tasted heaven, and in a way, because of that, we already live in heaven, so to speak, as we pursue the face of God and seek communion with Him. But because of that, our lives then need to reflect this citizenship and this life uh, in the spirit, and a life of participation. So I think that there's a deeper kind of Christianity in that I believe in. That sadly, I sometimes wonder how much of Christianity today actually really understands this and doesn't just treat it as a means by which to be saved from damnation, but actually as a way to enter into something that is greater.
That ties into something that I believe. I made a video a few weeks ago that I called it Five Coming to Jesus Moments That Led Me Away from Christianity. And my final moment was that I realized that everyone is pushing their vision of what their worldview ought to be. And we're really living in a competition of those ideas. And some of those ideas are going to fade and go away, and some are going to grow and get stronger. And then I heard, the two of you, before we were rolling, I heard you both talking about Christian nationalism. That's a good example. There are some people like Little House on the Prairie who are like, okay, we should all start behaving like we're supposed to, and hopefully that will turn into a nation of people who treat each other like you're supposed to. But it's got to start with us down here, and then it's got to catch on like a network. It cannot come from the form. Some people will say it cannot come from the form of the government going, hear ye, this is how you have to be. And I actually agree with that. If you do that, if you have the government saying, hey, it's got to be this way and we're doing this to make God happy, whoever's in charge of that is going to become corrupt only because they're a human. They could be a great person, but if they get in charge of deciding what's Christianity and what's not, they're gonna make it about themselves, especially because they can't be brought down, because whoever critiques them are going to be a heretic. So I agree with the people who say you can't do it from the top down. And then I agree with people who say it will be better to treat each other that way now, and hopefully it'll catch on and become a network. But that just aligns with my view that we live in a battle of ideas. So that if Christianity is true, and let's say it's true in the way that Brian says, we might still live in a world in 2050 where nobody lives that way. They live in a kind of Christianity that Brian would think is a nightmare. And if he was still alive, he might be curled up in a corner somewhere just going, how did that happen? Even if Christianity is true, that could still happen. And if Christianity isn't true, if it's all just a product of people's imaginations and their perceptions, even if it's not true, we might still live in a kind of walnut grove where everyone treats each other respectfully. And when somebody gets a little crazy, all of his peers and family kind of bring him back down. And we, again, go back to treating each other uh, in a kind of society where we can be respectful and productive. Um, we could do that with a fake religion, and we could screw ourselves up with a true religion. That's my point.
Yeah, something I see happening even in both sides of this. I mean, because I've been observing atheists and Christians and their interactions, even Christians interacting with other Christians for a long time. And I think that there is a push on doctrine, what is true. And I think that something that is beginning to be lost, maybe it's not beginning to be lost, maybe it's been lost for a long time, is that the value of truth must be in its attachment to love. I think that there is so much focus on what is doctrinally true in Christianity, which isn't bad in itself. And even on the atheist side, there is such an attention to what is factually true that by putting positioning ourselves on those grounds, we actually forget how to be charitable to one another because we aren't making the connection between the truth as it pertains to love. And perhaps on I could say on the atheist side, they're not making that connection because you simply can't make that connection. Everything just kind of just fall into facts. But on the Christian side, there needs to be a greater focus on, because this is true and because this truth speaks to a personality that is this way, as we speak of this truth, we need to actually be participating in having the kind of personality that is consistent with what we are claiming is true.
Yeah, this kind of aligns with what I think about how everybody just kind of assumes there's something, there's some kind of God, but because it's almost unfathomable to us to, statistically speaking, if you grab a human out of this 8 billion pot and bring them up to a spaceship, chances are they're going to be praying to something. They're going to think something is. And even a lot of atheists probably would start if they were pulled up into an alien ship. I do think we just kind of act as if there's something. I like to say we're like we're like ants in that how an ant colony has a queen. All the ants behave according to that queen's expectations, and we're just like we're like colonies where our queen is this metaphysical construct, social construct, rather than an actual queen. Um, and and you're right. If you're a atheist, if you're like, nope, there's no queen, then you really can't do much. Your whole colony is like, now what? We can't do anything. So you kind of have to assume that there is a queen. My only argument is that if there really is a queen for us, most of us are wrong. The vast majority of us are absolutely doing the wrong queen. And some of us are calling it Jesus. So there are people who know a Jesus in their heart and are getting that fulfilled by a Holy Spirit. That's wrong. So those are imaginations, whether demonic or human or whatever. That's really happening by the millions across the world under the name of Jesus. And and my thing about the real queen not stepping forward is just that it's not going to happen for whatever reason. We're going to have to work it out on our own. So I don't say there can't be a real queen, just that we're all going to act as if there is one. So we really just kind of have to compete with all these other people and say, okay, we think our idea is better, and hopefully our idea is going to catch on more than theirs does.
Yeah, and I would probably respond with that by saying that the queen, which I sort of speak of in one sense as a vision. So people don't just carry, I believe in this truth, therefore we should believe these facts. But I think that as people speak of truth, they are also carrying a vision of where that truth will take us. And I think that as far as that vision goes, and as far as like what you said, that queen needs to step forward. I would say, in a way, the queen has already stepped forward, and uh, because again, I sort of tie these things to a bit of an existential framework. If truth is valuable, then we have to be able to recognize that, or have a vision for where, in a positive sense, truth is ultimately going to take us. And if we can't find a positive vision for truth, then it really begs the question of, why are we talking about truth at all? Why not just go after a vision, regardless of whether or not it's true? Um, and that speaks back to, again, to my claim that truth and love, those things have to cohere. They have to come together. Truth gives love its authority, and love gives truth its value. And without those two things coming together, we really don't have any real, justification to claim truth, as if truth in some way bore any real authority on our pursuit of a vision that we had. I think existentially, then, Christianity becomes very satisfying because it's a truth that we believe, and we believe that by believing it produces a better world.
So, like, if you meet another Christian and they're talking about Jesus, but the way they're talking about Jesus is completely harmful to how you see Jesus, is that satisfying?
No, no, but I would say that at that point they have a wrong view of who Jesus is.
So, but what if they say, okay, what if that same person, and so you leave? Let's just say you're like, okay, that's wrong. Of course, it's not satisfying. I'm out, and you leave. and that person turns to me and says, anyway, this is the most satisfying, this has changed me, I live with this every day, I just want to share it with you. And I'm like, I wish that Jesus would come down and grab the two of you and say, you know what, Brian's correct and you're not, you have work to do. I wish that would help. You know what he's going to say? He's going to say, my brother, he already has. Jesus already has. Let me tell you the story. He did do that physically in our history. So every Christian says that Jesus already did it, but if they're all disagreeing, then no, he didn't. He didn't. Or if he did it in a way that we have all these growing fractures who aren't gonna, probably not, aren't gonna align together. They're probably gonna keep fracturing. So his coming down and showing us was fractionally successful rather than informative to all of us.
Yeah, well, and real quick, I'm just going to add this too. I think part of the way, again, that we recognize truth, you might be able to look at that Christian and me, and maybe even a different Christian, and let's say we look at Christ himself and say, which behavior coming from these people is actually able to produce a better world, you know? And I think in
agree.
a
By
way
the way,
yeah.
that's two things. You can keep going. I just want to go on the record that I absolutely agree with what you just said.
Yeah,
I can look
but
at people's behavior and say, which one of those produces what I think is the better kind of world?
I also believe that as soon as we recognize that, we have to be willing to subordinate ourselves to living that way, you know? And part of living that way, I think, is reorienting our interests and our preferences and our desires. You know, it's interesting. Let's maybe talk about homosexuality for a moment, because I think that this is probably an area where you and I would deeply disagree on how we should think about people who are oriented that way. I would, and I'll say this too. I've been really questioning how I think about or how I talk about that crowd on social media. In fact, in June, while I was doing the who's gay today kind of thing, I actually began to feel convicted that maybe I shouldn't actually be making jokes about this, because this isn't a way in which I'm going to actually bring any of those people to my side. If anything, I'm just mocking them. And so I took a pause on that, and I decided ultimately I'm just going to stop with that altogether. And once in a while, I still will throw out the gay joke, but a part of me is thinking, no, if I want to be effective at this, maybe I need to show a little bit of respect to people as they see themselves, not because I agree, but because I'm trying to be effective. Um, I would say that the kind of world that is existentially satisfying, that produces something better, again, we have to think about behavior and think about desires. I would want to go to someone who is of that persuasion and say to them, you should reorient yourself towards different desires, because I believe, one, you'll find more satisfaction there, and I believe that you'll also gain some capacity, some greater capacity to do some good in the world, by focusing on this deeper vision, and by participating in something that you don't need to continually be seeking out experiences or passions or pleasures, if you already have your deepest desires met, simply in knowing that you can participate in the deepest kind of reality, and this reality looks like this and produces this out of us.
Well, it's funny. You and I agree on a lot. I say I always judge people, and I do. I judge people left and right. I'm merciless about it. I always say I judge people by how close they are to Charles Ingalls, and for years that hit well because everybody knew Little House on the Prairie, but now we're in a generation that doesn't, and I don't know if they're going to watch this new version or not. But the one on this new version is very, very similar to the one on the old version, and I don't even know how the actual Charles Ingalls was, but he was very, very conservative. He was very big on taking care of his wife and his kids, and then being productive in his community. He wanted to play a part in his community, and he was the most respectful, loving guy, unless you were over the line. So if you were a bully, he would step up to you and go, "Hey, that's not respectable." If you were his best friend and you were coming home to your family drunk every night, he would say, "Hey man, let's go out to the lake and go fishing. We need to talk." He would get involved with other people, and not just stay in his lane. He was trying to make himself better and his family better and his community better. And I'm 100%. I'm always like, be like Charles Ingalls. And Christians are like, he was a Christian. And I'm like, okay, but be like that kind of Christian. Don't be like the ugly kind of Christians that you sometimes see on Twitter. Be more like Charles Ingalls. I think that's I think that's essential, and I even do that because you mentioned up homosexuality. My take on that is different than I make the right and the left mad, because my take on homosexuality is, how are you at home? And I've met, I got lucky because I'm in the counterterrorism business. Sometimes I'll brief political events, and this will happen on the right or the left, because they're not asking me to brief on the other party. They're asking me to brief on terrorism in general, or why people get so riled up. I was invited to one political event about 8 years ago, and almost all the attendees were gay marriage conservatives. So they were very wealthy, same sex marriage, had kids. All of them were dressed up, had businesses, and just hanging out with them and talking to them, they were like, "Man, these liberals, with their spending and their anything goes, my gosh, they're destroying the country. We need standards. We gotta take care of ourselves, take care of our churches, and take care of our communities." And I'm like, preach it, brothers and sisters, because that's exactly what I believe too. But they don't really have a party. They were saying, this neither really party really matches us, because we're very conservative. We would agree with the right on almost everything except whether we can go home and take care of our families, which we're obviously doing. And I told them, I'm like, you're just going to outcompete them by doing it and having an effective family. And if your kids grow up and say this is stable and this works, they're probably going to continue that, and that's probably how you're going to outcompete them. But you're right that neither party would be honored to have you right now, because you would be unaligned with their highest priorities. But I agree with them. I'm like, be like Charles Ingalls. If you're biologically compelled to be with your same gender, that's unusual. Left-handed is also unusual. It could also be damaging, so keep all that in mind. But if you're living like Charles Ingalls, then I don't have a problem with you.
Yeah, except Charles Ingalls would never be married to a man.
That's
So
true. And people will be happy to know that this one and this new version that came out this weekend also would not do that.
yeah. So I don't know. I look at that issue in relation to how I'm framing everything, and I think that, at least for me, part of what makes Christianity compelling is the fact that, I mean, I'm also someone who has interests in certain kinds of pleasures that I can really relate. Not to say that I'm, my interests are homosexual or like that, but of course I know what it's like to have a force working in me that draws me to bodily pleasures rather than to other things.
Yeah,
And
by the way, do you think that's evil, or do you think it's just biology?
so I would say that we have to orient ourselves and our pleasures properly. I would think about pleasures, one, in terms of our ontology, what are we, and teleology, what's our purpose. But I would also say that we need to subordinate all of our pleasures and desires to what is true, and again, tying truth to our behaviors. So I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with, say, a man finding a woman attractive and wanting to have a family, and doing all of the things that is necessary for that. But I would probably say that you should not be so pursuant of your pleasures as to forget the inherent humanity of it. And again, by humanity, I'm speaking to purpose, design, and ultimately that should draw us into a kind of worship, because I believe that worship is participatory in transcendental realities, which is, again, part of how I see all of this. There's nothing sinful, let's say, in taking pleasure in eating food. But again, how are we taking pleasure in it? How are we framing that pleasure? What's that pleasure for ultimately? Is it just Is it just for my enjoyment, or is there something that I need to remember? Like, I'm enjoying this pleasure in relation to certain things, not just in relation to myself.
I completely agree with all that. I don't think we've talked about Thomas Sowell yet, but Thomas Sowell, he's not a Christian, but he's just philosophically saying we've got to be the kind of species that has some sort of constraints. We can't just do whatever we want. And the liberals would say, "Hey, man, if you're enjoying it, go forth. I'm happy for you." Whereas Thomas Sowell would say, "Well, you have this whole community. There's things you could probably do that are more productive. And if we don't start embracing some of these constraints, then we're not going to have this amazing society. So we should embrace our constraints." And so he doesn't, if there's some kind of an impulse, since he's not religious, he doesn't think that impulse is evil, but he thinks we have to keep that in check. Say, okay, of course I'm going to feel this in this situation, but at the same time, I have this other purpose. And then this purpose creates constraints, and and then when you live like that, then it's easy to navigate through these impulses.
Yeah. I because I'm a presuppositionalist, I ask the question, by what standard, are we going to do things? And so, yeah, I believe in constraints, but I also believe in not simply constraints in a negative sense, but also constraints in what is this pursuant of, you know? And I think that we have to set that forth a vision
Well,
and
and I agree with that too. I always say we're in a battle of visions, and then your vision, the thing that you believe in, is going to come down to how well you and others keep it going. Because that vision is, it's like this metaphysical reality. It's like a bird song that a community of birds sings. That song isn't a real thing. I can't reach up above the birds and grab that song, but it is a real thing that drives them. So when you have this vision and you're able to put it in words and you live it out with your actions, and people see that, then they might join you and also talk about it. Then it becomes this metaphysical reality. Even though I can't grab it and show it to somebody, even though like I can't show Jesus, I can show this metaphysical version of Jesus, which might actually match the real one, maybe. But the metaphysical one is an actual thing on earth that can exist or not. It can grow or not, depending on how you behave.
yeah.
Can can I ask a question for both of you? This is a great conversation. I'm really enjoying it. So, is there any objective truth? Is there any objective morality? Because there's a lot of Richard, you're saying be like Charles Ingalls. Well, is that the best objective truth, or is it just the way that he's living? And from the Christian side, we also have to answer that same question. We don't just get to say, well, because of Jesus, we have objective truth. So I would like to hear both of you answer that.
You want to go first, Brian, or me? I'm
Oh,
I'm I'm
sure.
ready if you're not. Go ahead.
Okay, let me think about this for a second. So yeah, I believe in objective truth, uh, but I believe that the way the Bible speaks of truth is as something that is not merely factual but participatory. Um, so in the last conversation I had changed. I had said some things differently or added some things that I haven't yet gotten to, which is that I believe people are inherently able to recognize objective truths. And I think that the way in which we see this every day is in the way people use arguments to justify behaviors. And they do so by making appeals to abstract forms of authority. And so, truth and love are the two examples that I gave then. That people will say, well, because this is true, this is why my behavior is justified, or because this is lovely, this is why my behavior is justified. And so they speak of abstract forms of authority in order to justify concrete forms of behavior. And they do so because they see objectivity in the authority, uh, and whether or not that authority is being used properly, is going to, or improperly, is going to show itself in the behavior. And the distinction is going to be, was this merely being used to justify preferential behaviors, or was this being used to actually justify behaviors that are clearly recognizable as concrete forms of objective good? I think that people can do both of those things.
First of all, I want to say I agree with what you said, and then there's one caveat to it. Usually, when somebody's acting like a fool, pretty soon their behavior catches up to them. And then those of us who didn't get caught up in it, hopefully we're there for them to say, hey, you want to talk about how you can not do that again. And many times that does play out. But if your network is big enough, you really can do whatever you want. And that's what happened in the Nazi situation. He was acting like a fool, but his network supported him. So you weren't allowed to critique him. And that network kept the world from correcting him. So I agree with Brian that usually your behavior will get you where you should end up being. And I can say should just based on me borrowing from a Christian standard. I'm happy to say that. I also say that you could live your whole life and do whatever you want and just do horrible things and die in bliss in your 90s just because you had a network that would not let the world get to you. And so you were able to do whatever you wanted. That's why I say it's really a battle of ideas. And if you can keep the idea alive that you can do what you want and you have enough people to protect you, you really can't get away with it. Even if it's objective, let's say there's a moral objective evil to that, you can still do it with that network. That network is a real thing that can keep you going. And that could be for every single corruption nightmare, whether it was a religious speaker or a political speaker or whatever. Every single one of them had one thing in common. They had a network that kept the person from being held accountable. And that network kept it going. So I always say we're in this battle of ideas and it's being kept alive by the networks. Even if there is objective good and evil, those networks aren't always going to match that. They're going to just keep whoever's still here. So that was the first thing. But in terms of objective truth, yeah, I mean, obviously if the sun exists, then it does. And if I'm walking on the ground, then I am or not. That's objective truth. And I think everybody knows that. Even people who say there's no truth, it's all whatever we make. Even then, they've kind of created an ideology where whatever you say is, you live your truth. Even that person, if you're like, well, is the sun out or not? They can say, okay, yeah, it is. We better get inside. I think people know that there is some level of objective truth. In terms of objective morality, I don't know if there is or not, but I do think we all think so. So even someone who's a nihilist and who's trying to convince me that there is no objective morality, and I've had that with atheists who for years, hear my take on this, and they're like, well, I want to talk to you about how there isn't. And I'm thinking, like, how important is it to you that I believe you? And they're like, well, it's everything. You've got to believe that. And I'm like, well, it just seems like you're speaking morally now, that you want to take this time to explain it to me and you want me to understand your arguments. And they're like, no, it's just intellectual. And I'm like, yeah, but it's really, really important to you. If I told you the wrong, if you said, what's the capital of Ohio, and I gave you the wrong answer, you're not going to get mad. But if you ask me this question and I give you the wrong answer, you're going to get mad and riled up and keep talking to me. And I think that's moral.
I think it's really interesting, if I can add to the kinds of people that I see questioning things that are objectively true, like is the sky blue or is the grass green? I believe that those kinds of people are also the kind of people who are going to question what is objectively good, like qualitatively good for us to do. And I don't think that people who would say, clearly or obviously the sky is blue and the grass is green, these things are objectively true, we can just observe them as true, would be as often the case the kinds of people that would also say, should we question what is morally objectively true? So I think there's a connection there. Because I do think that we can, in the same way that we observe the sky and the ground, make observations as we watch people know who is being objectively good and who is being objectively bad. I think it's the same thing. So,
It could be, and it's like I was saying before. Even if that's the case, let's just say that there's an objective moral law that you can't harm somebody. You can't physically harm somebody who's just standing there. You just do it because you want to. That's morally objectively wrong across all times and cultures, and it's been instituted by the source of morality itself, and he's therefore the standard by which we now know. let's say that's true. All I'm saying is that there can be a network for a guy who can drive around town with a baseball bat and hit whoever he wants, as long as that network glorifies him and says he's amazing, and then they immediately attack anyone who tries to criticize him. That's a real thing that can happen. There's no network right now with a man with a baseball bat, but there are examples in history where people do things, whatever they want, and they might even say it's objectively morally true, and Brian and I will see right through it and say, dude, you're just doing what you want. But that network keeps it going, and they aren't held accountable. And if they are, it might be decades later. So yeah, I just argue, okay, there could be objective moral truths like what Brian says. They won't always set the standard for how people behave.
Yeah, I would even say that those kinds of networks develop as seeming to the vast crowds out there. I think that the way those kinds of networks are built is ultimately through propaganda. I used the example of Kim Jong-il in North Korea the last time we spoke, and how the propaganda of the use of a statue of Kim Jong-il, the leader of North Korea, tying the shoe of a soldier, was ultimately, I would say, the goal of that was to subject the people of North Korea to a dictatorial network. But I would say that the means by which they achieved that was to first appeal to things that are recognizably morally good.
Oh, I absolutely agree. That's I work in the radicalization business, and I study like how does like a good person join up with a movement that's completely counter to how he was, say, 5 years ago. But he just loves it. He couldn't feel more happy, and he couldn't feel more righteous, and he just can't wait to share how wonderful things are. And he's literally endorsing things that 10 years ago he would have hated. And he'll describe himself in those days as lost, and he's like, oh, I just wish for you to know the enlightenment that I now know, and I'm so ashamed of myself those 10 years ago. And I'm like, actually, you were a really good person 10 years ago. You just, you're in love with a person. You're in love with a man. That's propaganda gets you through love or resonance. And yeah, propaganda absolutely dominates. And if it didn't dominate, then AI and social media wouldn't be knocking us across the room with it. But propaganda works, and it starts with love, and it matters who you love. If you decide you're going to love a person and worship and glorify a person, then you're going to end up devastated at some point, or you're going to do things that would probably devastate you later. So I agree with you that propaganda and things like that are absolutely damaging, but it's happening.
If I could use three scriptural examples for how I'm thinking about this and framing this, in Scripture, Jesus says three things. He says, "A wicked and perverse generation seeks a sign, but I will not give a sign except for the sign of Jonah." And in another place, he says, "The light has come into the world, but people loved darkness rather than light." And then also, when he speaks of his own witness to himself and the things that he's doing, he speaks as though he is his works speak as a witness for him. And so I think that as a kid, I didn't understand what was really driving this point. As a child, in fact, I thought that there was something almost silly about what he was saying, because I was so moved by evidence and facts. But as I've gotten older, I've begun to realize and appreciate, I think, what is being said in that. I think, why do we need evidence to simply be good? Because I think that we recognize what is right. And I think that the life that Christ lived was a life that speaks to what is just recognizably good. And so for him to say, I'm not going to give you wicked people a sign except for the sign of Jonah. You're seeking a sign for what? To justify or to say, unless I am given some kind of external evidence, I am in no way going to act appropriately or act Christ-like. Is how I read that.
I just think that people's views of what's appropriate and what's recognizably good can change, and that propaganda can absolutely affect that. And the way it works cognitively is that the people who do, like in the Nazi situation, the people who would do atrocities and still be able to go to bed at night, was that they had prioritized loyalty to a person over any standards. And they have been taught that these standards that you perceive are wrong, and you need to biologically, or you need to cognitively squash those perceptions, these things that you're talking about that are natural, and you need to replace that with loyalty to this person. This person says this, you need to do that. And then not only that, you need to look for people who aren't doing that, and you need to correct them, and you need to be very passionate about it, or else you're a bad person. People buy into that. And I think like the way for us to get past that, and by the way, this happens everywhere. This isn't like, oh, one party's doing this or one nation's doing this. It works. The thing is, the reason why it works is that it works. It's actually, people are actually falling for it. And you got to know, you got to be the kind of person that says, if this leader is a good person and he does something good, I'll give him credit. But if he does something bad, I'm going to call him out. And I'm going to go by the behavior. I'm not going to go by the man. And propaganda will say that's wrong. You go by the man first. And that's how you can pick it out. But even so, even though that is how you can pick it out, you'll meet a lot of people who will not critique the man. They will defend the man based on him, not the activity. And that's how you can tell. That's how you can tell what it is. But at the same time, it also still works.
Yeah, and I would say too, Christians are just as susceptible to this kind of thing as anyone. So
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's a human
yeah,
thing. There's no religion, and also I have atheists who go, well, I don't have to worry about that. I've left Christianity, so there's no politician that will do that to me. And I'm like, well, AOC is not really that great. Wait, hey, hold on, dude. That's AOC. Hold on, hold just a second. So it really is a human nature thing, and you can be religious or not, and you can just think a person is so amazing that they're above criticism. It's like that guy. I was just talking to Braxton Hunter and Mike Laconi yesterday. We were at an event the past few days here in Georgia, and we were talking about Ravi Zacharias, and I was like, I guarantee you, when he started, he was a good guy. He just got to a point where he thought he could do a few things, and then his network let him do it. And then over the years, it developed into he ought to be able to do this. And anyone who tries to stop him is stopping a godly man, because they could say, look at all these people who are leaving our auditoriums who are coming to Jesus. If that's happening by the tens of thousands, what are these 20 or 30, unfortunate young ladies? What are they in comparison to these tens of thousands? So it started small, and they started with a good person. It's just, instead of being held accountable, that network let him do whatever he wanted to do. And I was saying that even if atheism became the dominant religion and there was an atheist speaker who was going around and people were leaving auditoriums confessing to nothingness or whatever, even if that were happening by the tens of thousands, he could still have another 20 or 30 unfortunate young ladies, because his network lets him get away with it and endorses it and enforces it. And they make it so that you can't criticize the man. You have to defend the man. That could happen to anybody for any type of worldview.
yeah, I agree.
This is wonderful conversation. So propaganda itself is bad. Would we not agree with that? And so we are making a moral judgment about what we're talking about here. And I agree with you. Propaganda and the network can allow people to fall into these behaviors. Ravi Zachariah is a wonderful example, because he, by all accounts, he was a great Christian man. And then unfortunately, I believe it was after he passed, a lot of things came out about him, and it changes how a lot of us perceive him. And yet, I grew up listening to him, and I was like, oh, he seems like such a great Christian guy. And so you're right. The network allowed for that behavior to happen. So we would say, we can say, and I think most people probably would, that the propaganda, the network, whatever you want to call it, is bad. And then with that, I would make the case that the Christian worldview has an answer for why, and that is because of sin, whereas the non-Christian worldview just says, well, that's just wrong. It's wrong because it's wrong. So curious your thoughts on that.
I always say, when it comes to propaganda, and again, this is my specialty. The way they get you is they say, this person here deserves to be beyond criticism and deserves your loyalty at all costs. There's not a situation where you would start to question whether you should. You know you should. That's the first avenue. The second avenue that propaganda works is they say, give me something that matters to you. And people will say, well, Christianity. And they'll say, great, that's why you need to buy this particular thing, because this is a Christian thing. So make sure that when you talk about Christianity, you talk about this thing too, because they're aligned so perfectly. And you need to start telling people about this along with Christianity, and put a poster of Jesus behind you and a cross and then this thing in the middle. They'll do that at churches. And have this in the background as you're preaching the word on Sunday morning, because you're Christian. If you're Christian, right, well then make sure this thing's there behind you. That's how propaganda gets you. Either you have to agree with this person, or if there's a label that matters to you. This is where Brian and I might really align. The way that you can get past propaganda is to focus on the behavior over people and the behavior over the label. Even if a person is usually good, and even if a label is true, the way propaganda grabs you is that it says you have to give loyalty to the person first over anything else, or you have to associate your label with this thing that we have, and you have to do that first. That's your primary concern. You could even say moral. Your primary moral concern is loyalty to this person or aligning your label to this thing. And if you're the kind of person who says, no, I'm going to go by the label, and I'm going to go by the behavior. So you say, no, I'm going to go by the behavior over the label, over the person, so that if there's a label that I like and somebody's associating it with behavior that I don't like, I'm going to call out the behavior. And I realize that people in my label are going to be like, hey, I thought you liked our label. You're going to have to be strong enough to say, I do like our label, which is why I'm not going to cover up this behavior. I'm going to stick with the behavior. And when somebody that you generally like messes up, you're like, no, I'm going to call out this behavior. And other people are going to go, hey, I thought you liked him. He's pretty good. He's better than the other guy. Okay, that's true. But I'm still going to call out this behavior. This behavior isn't correct. And then people get to know you. Oh, he's a behavior guy. He's not a label guy. He's not a person guy. He's a behavior guy. And if you can get people to know you by that, then I think you've taken a good step in overcoming propaganda.
Yeah, I would probably just say I think labels are inevitable. I think that we will always find ourselves connecting to something. I think then the
Yeah,
question just needs to be, what is it that we are connecting to? And we have to remember, like, there may be some, like, to use again, Ravi Zacharias or any person who was a Christian leader at one point who was highly respected. Like, we have to remember not to idolize the creature. I use that creator-creature distinction within my own Reformed framework. I see Christ as the appropriate label or identifier, because I also see in him something as greater than creature, and I see that again because of behavior. I think that there is just where is behavior derived within my framework. I am thinking deeply about this in terms of that distinction. I think that you have to understand that behavior is not just something that is tied to us, that we as creatures can choose between good and bad, but in choosing, we actually have to begin with something deeper than just the mere choice. We have to begin with what it is that is the vision set before us, what it is that we are participating in life. And there's a very real religious aspect to this that I can't deny.
Would you agree that, like, if you have a vision and you want that vision to be to expand and be embraced more, would you agree that behavior is going to be a very integral part of that?
Absolutely, yeah, because I see behavior as part, if not the whole argument. um,
Well,
I,
I agree. So,
yeah,
yeah, and my thing for labels is, by all means, you're right. There's going to be labels. It's like I said before. If we could go back in time and eliminate Christianity from happening, there would still be another label. It might not be as dominant as this one now, or it might be more, or there might be several that are at this level. But labels are inevitable. All I'm saying is prioritize the behavior. Know what behavior is good or bad to you first, so that when another Christian says, hey, I want you to start embracing this behavior because I just talked to Jesus and he told me to tell you that this is fine and we need you on board, I want you to be strong enough to go, no, no, I know that that's wrong, and I'm not going to go with you, and you say what you will. That's all I'm saying. Don't ignore labels. Just prioritize the behavior first.
So is there a standard though? Because I guess that's kind of what my question was
Well,
before.
that's fine. My thing for standards is I get standards. I get this all the time. Let's just say there is. I always tell my friends, let's just say there is, and let's say that your standard is right. I'll concede that. Now go forth with that standard, and just don't let anybody take you off course using labels and using people. And then we'll just say that, hey, it's your standard that did that. I don't say there can't be a standard, and there's nothing I can do to make somebody think that there isn't. But I have seen people who believe in standards uh, violate their own standards out of loyalty to a person or loyalty to a label.
Yeah, I think that it's deeply interconnected. Because again, I think that even as I was saying earlier about appeals to abstract authority, principles, truths, love, like even to make an argument like that is deeply participatory, and it is behavior. But is that behavior towards that recognizable good ultimately going to be in service to good, or is it behavior that we recognize as good but is ultimately only being appealed to for the sake of what is going to come out of it, which may be behavior that falls very short of that initial behavior of appealing rightly to what is truly authoritative.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I've been in this discussion too, and I'll use the analogy of like a town lost. This town lost like a whole street, and there was a church there, and a school there, and some houses there, and so a bunch of us have all gotten together. We have lumber, we have all the materials, we have people who know how to rebuild, we have architects. So we're all there. We've got all the supplies, and we're all working. And as we're working, some Muslims are like, "You guys realize that none of this will be happening if Islam wasn't true. Thank God Islam is true. If we could just kind of confirm that as we're doing this work, it would just memorialize that fact." And some people would be like, "No, actually, that's because Hinduism is true." And somebody else is like, "Well, no, actually, it's because no religion is true." And some people are like, "Well, no, it's because Christianity is true." I'm going to say, "Hey, guys, we know how to build, right? Let's build this street." And then the Hindus want to think it's because Hinduism. Go forth, have at it, and even have the discussion. But don't let it stop your work. Don't let it stop your work, and don't let one of your friends tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, if they're not going to confirm my thing, screw these houses, screw this church, screw the schools. Let's just go home." Don't let anybody talk you out of it. Don't let them use your label to stop the work.
yeah, I would probably add to that. It's like, we can all build houses per se. I mean, I can't, I'm not I don't do construction, but I can say, like, we could probably all argue on behalf of our own frameworks that, yeah, it's because of my framework that this building is getting built. But the deeper question is, how is this building going to then be used? You know?
Right. I agree.
So,
I'm just saying within sometimes there's something that just needs to be done, and people will use propaganda to not get you to do that, and then they'll use your label or they'll use an icon to try and sway you, and it works so much that I just try to tell people, make sure you know what needs to get done and make sure you do it. Don't stop doing it because someone said, "Hey, uh, your label matters. The person that you care for matters, and they don't want you to do this." Make sure you know what you're about so that you're able to withstand that.
yeah, interesting.
I really appreciate you guys. It's really cool to have a Christian and an atheist mostly saying I agree with you.
Well, he's mostly
So
saying I agree with you.
yeah, well that's true. That's true. Richard's more agreeable.
And there were two occasions where I outright said, "Hey,
Yeah,
he
you
said
did.
that," and I agree with him. Yep.
This will be the last time I push this point, but I am just curious because what you were just saying was interesting, Richard. And so it sounds like, and the point you've kind of been making is behaviors are the most important thing. So to you, the truth that a person believes in to you is less important than their behaviors. Like their behaviors are the more important thing to you. And if they do have a truth, then you want that truth to positively impact their behaviors.
Yeah. That's accurate. That's accurate to say that, but that's not to say I don't care about their truth, and or it also doesn't say that I'm not open-minded to the fact that they could be right. It could be that they're correct. I'm just saying I've seen way too many people say, "I really want you to embrace this label," and I want it so bad that I'm going to change how I am, and I'm going to change what I do so that I, over time, become less impressive, even to other people in my label, because I'm so intent on you saying these words. That's the kind of thing I want to stop.
Sure. So with behaviors, though, obviously certain behaviors are bad, and so I'm curious, like, how do you then judge or look at those behaviors? Do you take more of like a non-aggression principle stance of just, don't hurt somebody else, and as long as you're just living your life, then it's okay?
Well,
Or is there some
well,
sort of
well,
standard to it?
well, remember, I was a Marine, so if when you talk about aggression, then I can jump right into that if I have to. Um, so it's not so much non-aggression. I would say, don't hurt somebody who's just standing there. And I also don't tell people. I spend a lot of my time talking to people who say, "Hey, what I'm doing right now isn't hurting anybody," and I'll say, "Okay, that might be true." And what it might be is casual drinking, but it's like 4 or 5 drinks per night, and maybe they don't hit anybody or yell or scream, but it's 4 or 5 drinks per night, and I'll say, okay, you're right, you're not hurting anybody technically. Alcohol is poison, but you're not out there hurting anyone. You're not screaming and yelling. You don't get depressed, but at the same time, there's other things you can do. So I'll say, yeah, maybe you're not harming anybody, but you could be more productive than that. That's 4 or 5 hours you could be putting towards learning something or something. I'll talk to people like that. So I'm not, I'm always judging, and I'm always reaching out to people to say, hey man, consider this. So I'm no different than an evangelical. I'm exactly the same as evangelical, but yeah, I'm thinking about, hey, this could be more productive. You could be more respectful, and sometimes I'll say, hey, this is the kind of behaviors that you normally want to see. This is what you talk about, and yet you don't do it. And they'll say, well, because we're at war, man, and we got to do whatever. And if we are at war, great. But if we're not really at war, and propaganda has kind of made you think we're at war, then you can really become a different kind of person, and then you kind of violate your own standards. But in terms of what I think is good or bad, how did I get to Charles Ingalls? Probably my experiences. Probably I was raised by mostly Christians. My dad wasn't Christian, but he was like, they still have a good idea. My dad didn't mind my mom taking me to church, even though he didn't think it was real. He was like, you still should go. You're not going to meet evil people at your church, and your church community is going to be good to you. And he would still say Charles Ingalls is a great dad. He said, look, I'm not a good dad, but Charles Ingalls is. So I guess my experiences are how I came to think that something like Charles Ingalls is good, and you have to be tough sometimes, and you have to be respectful and open-minded sometimes. And then it became important to me, and that became my battle. Am I objectively correct? I don't know, but this is how I'm gonna act.
Yeah, if I could add to that, just as I've been thinking, like I think we can agree, like, yeah, we can look at people's behaviors and say, yeah, that's good, and that's coming from this person with this framework. But again, I think as I'm thinking about this, my question is, what kind of framework preserves the continuation of that kind of behavior, and where is that behavior ultimately being derived from? Why is a Muslim acting this way? Why is somebody who subscribes to Hinduism acting this way, or an atheist acting this way? And I think it has to do with the vision that is set forth as well as experience. So as I'm listening to Richard, you saying you're talking about how much of how you are is derived from your experiences. My question would be, where are those, how have those experiences developed, how have they arisen, what kind of historical precedence has set forth these kinds of experiences? And I'm thinking back on our previous conversation when you had mentioned something about morality for you being more preferential, when I had asked you about biology, you know and for me, if experience plays a part in it, and experience is also derived from somewhere deeper or somewhere back in history, what needs to happen? What kind of vision do we have to set forth before us in order to continue to preserve the kind of experiences that bring about the kind of behavior that right now we recognize as good, rather than seeing our experiences change and possibly, likely, seeing our preferences change in light of the change of our experiences?
Yeah, I see what you're getting at, and I agree that I was raised in a largely Christian setting, and so a lot of my standards are things that some people would assign to Christianity. But then also keep in mind there's different versions of Christianity, and there's Christians right now who are like, no, if you're not more like those soldiers who are marching into villages and cleaning them out, then you're not really a Christian. That happened too. There's a Christian scholar named John Dixon who wrote a book called Bullies and Saints. And he was like, from a Christian standard, these are times when I think we did things that aligned with the Christian message. And these are things where we're absolutely the enemy of Christian message. And we were doing it as Christians. And he was like, he'll list in his book, Bullies and Saints, he'll list Christian leaders at the time using the Bible and using philosophy to convince people to do these, what he says is awful things according to the Christian message. And that lines up with my message too. I'm like, we're gonna have these battle of ideas. And the reason why that's important is that when our kids are born, and I've got two young daughters now in high school and college, the kind of world that they're raised in is going to be affected by these battle of ideas. And so we should be thinking, hey, what kind of world do I want them to be raised in? How do I want that to affect them? So if you want to say that I was raised in a time of Christianity where people were treating each other very well, that's true. Incidentally, I was also raised in a kind of Christianity, not just locally, but nationally. I was raised in a kind of Christianity that said scientists were working with the devil to plant dinosaur bones to keep people from embracing the Bible. And that wasn't just local churches. That was Oral Roberts on CBS. That Robert Schuller. I remember when I was a kid struggling with Christianity and faith absolutely meant believing it without evidence. And Robert Schuller, back then anyway, and Robert Schuller, he was like in California on this great stage. And I remember as a kid, and I felt so enlightened by this. He said, if proof is possible, then faith is impossible. And everybody, it's like, oh, and I remember thinking like, oh, of course, that's why. Now I do need to believe he's right, because if it was proven to me, then I wouldn't have faith. So, oh, okay. And apologists cringe with that. If I tell that to Melissa Doherty, she's like, oh, I can't believe you said that. Oh my God. I was raised in that kind of Christianity too. So,
Yeah.
you can say that I have my Christianity to thankful for, but I also, the reason why so many people are walking away from Christianity in college is because so many people were raised in that kind of Christianity in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah, I think that faith, as I was being raised in the early 2000s, back when the debates were happening between people like Richard Dawkins and Hitchens and John Lennox and whatnot. And so a lot of my thinking about Christianity and what faith is was highly influenced by listening to those debates as a kid. And
Yeah.
I think that my thinking on faith has shifted somewhat from how I understood it as a kid.
Well, that's
Um,
fine. Yeah, but I just want to say it's fine. It could
oh
be
yeah,
that's not what faith means. I just want to point out that the reason why Dawkins and the reason why Christopher Hitchens used that definition is because throughout the nation on ABC, CBS, and NBC, and in churches, that's
right,
the definition that was used.
right. And I agree with you. And I think that that's actually done. I think that that's been detrimental.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's good and bad for being raised in Christianity. It depends on the kind of Christianity.
yeah, yeah.
I'm kind of happy now. Whatever, if you guys anything else you want to say, we can. But that was my main point.
I do have one more question for both of you, though.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on here, and this is again just a wonderful conversation. I think you're both very charitable to each other. So I have a question for both of you, and so I'll start with you, Brian. Is there any evidence or anything that would potentially convince you that Christianity isn't true? And I know that's not Richard's point, to convince you that Christianity is not true. And then Richard, the same question, but on the reverse side, is there anything that would convince you that Christianity is true? Is there something that you were like, if somebody could just answer this for me, then I could believe it? Is there one or two things that are like, this is the thing? You can answer it however you want.
The way I've thought about this, because I've tried to answer this question in the past to myself, and because again I'm framing this as seeing truth and love as deeply connected, I think the only thing that would convince me that Christianity isn't true is if there was something that, as a vision, was deeper and more satisfying than Christianity, something existentially better. And so, because again, I see the truth of Christianity in part by the the character of Christ. Um, Show me a better character than that, and I will be more compelled to believe it.
Obviously, so I'm just very analytical, and sometimes I get pushback on this, and it's kind of surprising. Obviously, a conversation with Jesus where I have a bunch of a bunch of talking points. It wouldn't just be him. Like if he appears and says, "Look, I'm real," especially if he just appears out of thin air and shoves me and says, "I'm real," that would be enough for me to say, "Okay, there's something." You know, and his name's Jesus, and he just pushed me, and hey, I heard that much at least. I would definitely go with that. I'm not one of those people that says, "Oh, I would just say I was hallucinating." My senses got me this far, so I would trust him in that situation too. But I would want like a long conversation. I would want to bring the Bible. I would want to go read, not read, but I would want to go see heaven and hell, and I would say I want to know exactly. I wrote a post about this on my Fallen Ape-Theist page. Uh, I would say I'd want to go see heaven and hell. I'd want to say how does it work that some people go here and some people there? Like what specifically is it behavior? Is it mindset? Because everybody disagrees on how this works. How does this exactly work? I'd want that. And then I'd want the Bible, and I would say, I want you to admit, person that you're talking to me, that when this says, it works this way, and then another verse says it works the other way, I want you to acknowledge that is why some Christians go, wait, hold on. Will you acknowledge that much? And then if he says, yeah, okay, it does say that here, and it does say the other way there, but there's a reason why, and it's important that you understand that reason, I will completely accept it. But I would first want him to go, okay, yeah, I understand why Christians leave over confusing things in the Bible. Never mind that atheists use that to try and disprove the Bible. Christians leave because they're convinced. So I would at least want him to acknowledge Christians are leaving because of this. So why did you do it this way? And Jesus could even say, look, I'm real. We never told anybody to make a Bible. Nobody said write this down. Christians said this needs to be memorialized, and they came up with a Bible. You guys did that with your own free will. We don't endorse the Bible. We're just, we told you to go tell people. We didn't tell you to write it down. That could be, I mean, that would go against scripture, but maybe whoever wrote scripture made that part up. But he could say that part isn't even relevant. I just want you to know that I'm the Son of God, and I'm the source of your salvation. And if you want to spend eternity with your everlasting Father, that can only happen through me. Great. If he answers all that, answers my questions, and we have that conversation, I'm absolutely on board. And my final thought to him would be, you've got me for life, right? But you also know that I'm not going to be able to convince the rest of the world. You gave me all these answers. You want me to go tell people? I will. You got me. But do you also realize that that's not going to work because other people are going to have their own frameworks and they're going to see me as a threat? So you realize that that's going to be a problem. And he'll say, yeah, I know. I just, that's how this is going to be. Deal with it. Then I would do it. I would take that and run with it, and I would even want to know, why don't you do this for everybody? Why don't you just show this to everybody, like I would with my kids, or as a boss, like I would with my people who work for me? Why not just explain it to them, and then they have the free will to obey or not, and then hold them accountable because now they have clarity. Why not do that?
Well, thank you both for answering that. And I just thought it might be a more interesting question than the other way around. But once again, thank you guys. And where can people find you online? Do you have a online presence? Brian,
You want?
yeah, you go, Richard. Go ahead. Where can people find you?
Oh, for me first? Okay. Fallen Ape-Theist, Fallen, and then the next word, APE, and then dash THEIST. That way, if I ever do become a theist, I can say I'm a fallen ape-theist instead of
There
a
you
fallen
go.
ape-theist. But that would be Facebook, Twitter, such as it is, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Substack.
Sure. Awesome. And I'll
That's
link
it.
to all that. I'll link so people can get to you as well.
Okay.
And you do some YouTube content too, right? You said?
Yeah, I make some. I need to do better at that. But I just put out a video on YouTube for my 5 coming to Jesus moments that led away from Christianity, and it's not doing badly. So I'm kind of glad that got embraced a little bit by by the Christian community.
Okay, I'll have to watch that, and maybe I'll post that as well.
Okay.
And Brian, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, making memes. My page is called Puritan Panda.
Well, any final words? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, well, as I was listening to you, Richard, talking about the answer that you gave to our host, I was thinking like, man, we have to have another conversation where we get to answering all of these questions that you have.
Yeah, I've had that. I go and I'll go talk to youth groups and church groups. A lot of Christian organizations have me come out to talk to them. And some people will say, "What would it take?" And I'm like, a conversation. I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, I will gladly go question by question with you." You know what? I should collect all those answers because it kind of proves my point. One of the first things I tell all these groups is, when I hear a Mormon talk to me about Jesus and God, I'm not really actually hearing about Jesus and God, right? I'm hearing how they see Jesus and God. And they're like, "Yeah, you're right, absolutely." And then my opening statement is, that might be what you're doing too. So I love to have people say, "Hey, here's my answers to those questions," but really those will be your answers to those questions, not necessarily objectively the answers to those questions.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, I'd still be open to the conversation sometime.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That might be a fun talk.
Yeah,
Sweet.
absolutely. All right. Well, you both have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of your summer. And we'll maybe talk to you both or one of you again sometime in the future here. And again, I'll link to all your socials so people can find you if they want to follow you guys.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Brian and Richard again for joining me for the second time. Because again, we already recorded an episode and it was lost. But they were gracious and they came back. And I actually think that this turned out even better than the first time. Now, this was not really a debate, as you just heard, at least not in the most traditional sense of it. There was not opening statements. There were not counter-arguments. There was no stopwatch. Instead, they just talked. They had a conversation. One of the things that I appreciated and I found very interesting was how often Brian and Richard found common ground without pretending that their differences were insignificant. They agreed that our beliefs should impact how we live. And they agreed that propaganda can corrupt religious and political communities. They agreed that no leader, movement, or label should be used to excuse wicked behavior. And they agreed that Christians are no less susceptible to manipulation, tribalism, or to the idolization of human leaders than anyone else. Christians should never be afraid to expose evil merely because the person committing it belongs to our group. When we defend wickedness to protect a leader, an institution, or a political movement, or even the reputation of Christianity as a whole, we're not actually defending Christ. We are bearing false witness about him. And that's what I do here at the Bad Fruit Podcast often, is expose false teaching, expose literally bad fruit in the church. So I appreciated that we got to that a little bit here in the episode. Now, at the same time, I do not believe that Christianity is simply one useful vision competing in a marketplace of ideas. I do not believe that Jesus is valuable merely because his teachings may help us construct a more satisfying society. Christianity makes a much greater claim than that. Jesus Christ is not merely an inspiring character or the embodiment of our highest ideals. He is the incarnate Son of God, crucified for sinners and raised bodily from the dead. That distinction matters because our problem is deeper than mere ignorance, bad social conditioning, or a failure to choose the most productive behavior. Our problem is sin. We do not merely need a better model to imitate. We need forgiveness. We need reconciliation with God. And we need the dead to be raised. Richard repeatedly returned to behavior, and I understand why. Anyone can claim to possess the truth. Anyone can place the name of Jesus over a movement, or a politician, or a ministry, or a podcast, or personal ambition, right? Christ himself warns us that false prophets will come in his name. He tells us that we will recognize them by their fruit. Behavior matters. Fruit matters. But the fruit does not create the tree, and good behavior does not reconcile us to God. The Christian life begins not with our successful imitation of Christ, but with Christ giving himself for us. Richard's answer to my final question concerning what might convince him that Christianity is true. He wants clarity. He wants to ask Jesus his questions. He wants to understand why Christians disagree, why Scripture can be difficult, and why God does not simply appear and settle every dispute. The answers to those questions are not simple, and I don't think that Christians should pretend that they are. Christians sometimes offer shallow answers when patience and humility are actually required. We sometimes confuse faith and say that it is merely believing without evidence, as though doubt itself were virtuous and God preferred us to believe with no reason at all. But biblical faith is not a blind leap into the darkness. It is trust in the God who also acted in history, spoke through his prophets, the apostles, and ultimately revealed himself in Christ Jesus. Brian, or the Puritan Panda, believes that the character of Christ presents the deepest and most satisfying vision of reality. Richard remains unconvinced that the vision corresponds to an objective God who has clearly revealed himself. But conversations like this still matter. We should listen carefully enough to understand the objections being made. We should answer honestly when Christians have behaved wickedly or taught foolish things. We should resist the temptation to defend our tribe at all costs. And above all, we should keep pointing beyond ourselves, our institutions, our political loyalties, and even our ability to argue. We should point to Jesus Christ. Because Christianity does not finally rest upon the goodness of Christians. Thanks be to God for that. It rests upon Christ, crucified and risen for sinners. Thank you for listening to the Bad Fruit Podcast today. We'll talk to you next time. God bless.